Hi everybody, welcome back to Friend Crush. I'm Akilla and today we're joined by Yasmin.
Hello!
Another fellow Sagittarius. I'm just collecting
Oh
Sagittarius friends
yeah.
now.
Holy shit.
Let's start with an intro about you. Yasmin, tell us about yourself.
Well, hello, I'm Yasmin. I'm a photographer primarily, and I run a production company called Culture Machine here in Sydney. Um, I suppose we're going to launch into talking about kind of diaspora and our cultural identity. So I guess I'll kind of define myself in that way too. So my dad is Balinese, my mom is Greek. I was raised in Bali until the age of 8, and then I moved to Sydney, and I've been back and forth. Um, I opened a studio recently here in Sydney, and in a nutshell, I am a photographer and content creator, and I run a production company, and I'm very interested in culture and the mechanics of culture. And that's why I called my company Culture Machine without quite realizing it at the age of 21 when I registered the name. Now that I'm 28, it's definitely taken on a whole new meaning for me. And I'm very much unpacking sort of what culture is and what culture means to me, and what culture is in the context of Australia, or at least my existence in Australia in 2020. So,
How would you say that, great intro.
Thanks.
How would you say that, you started your interest in, how did your creative journey begin? I think we can all think back to, it was, in art class or through music. For you with photography, was that kind of, the primary medium that you were always working with, or did you start with something else and then kind of move into photography later?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I go all the way back to my earliest memories, I grew up in Bali, like I said, and one of my childhood friends, her mum was originally from Perth, but was an expat living in Bali. Was a very colourful character. She travelled around the world and was very interested in art. She had this book, David LaChapelle's Heaven to Hell book, which is a photography book. And so I'm an 8-year-old flicking through these very graphic pictures of celebrities. There's a lot of nudity, a lot of gore, a lot of hyperbole in the way that the photographs are taken. La Chapelle has a great sense of humor, and there's a lot of, I mean, all of these things, I kind of realized later on. But as an 8-year-old, I was looking at very oversaturated, visually stimulating images. And I think that if I'm to trace it right back to the beginning, I think that was kind of a moment where I thought, I want to do something like this. I want to make images, and I want to make images that are as vibrant in color as they are in message. Yeah, so as an 8-year-old, I'm sitting in my friend's villa looking through this massive hardcover book of these visually vibrant, oversaturated images, but also kind of metaphorically vibrant images that have layers beyond what you're just looking at. There's multiple messages being told and a little bit of humor in it as well. So if I am to trace it back, because I've been asked that question a lot, and I think most creatives are asked that question to kind of think back to when did you first start doing something. And that kind of came to me as a very vivid memory. I can remember sitting there as an 8-year-old and doing that. So I think that's where it started. And if I was to look at the kind of constant throughout all of my work, I think that's always been something I've aspired to.
Yeah.
Creating work that is vibrant, not just on an aesthetic level, but also on, through its messages, or at least kind of through its wordplay, and just kind of having an understanding of context and message and meaning. Because as I've gotten older, I've realized that photography is a massive responsibility. When you're a photographer, you have the responsibility of representation in your hands. And that is through your subject matter, that is through your direction, that is through what you choose to exclude, that is what you choose to include. On many different levels, a photographer has a massive responsibility, and that feeds into culture, which has always been, I think, the crux of what I've been interested in. So, in terms of kind of my early interest would have just been kind of looking at these very visual graphic images, not necessarily understanding the layers of meaning. And then my adult journey has been looking at layers of meaning. You know, I'm reading many things at the moment, like The Artist's Way, and then oh god, what is the book that I had today that's about reading images from different lenses? It will come back to me. But essentially, kind of in my adult life and in my art practice, understanding on several levels what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to say more than ever in 2020. I think I've been struggling with this idea that it's not enough just to create images. You've got to
beyond
think
just
about what
aesthetics.
they are. Exactly. But it's not something that I think I've mastered yet. I think I'm negotiating, you know, making a living and working on a commercial level with also having a responsibility to the community and having a responsibility, I think, to myself and what it is that I want to say as an artist, because I don't think you can really call yourself an artist unless there is something that you're trying to say.
Yeah, I think we can touch on like we'll get back to the commercial and like personal work balance. So, did you study photography in university?
No, so I had the opportunity to study. So when I was in high school, I won a photography competition that was run by UTS, and I got immediate entry into photography and situated media. I also won $3,000, which let me buy my first DSLR, a Nikon D90 for any tech people out there. I decided that studying photography was going to be quite limiting in the sense that I was still very interested in lots of things, including journalism and filmmaking. And so I thought doing a BA and doing a more general degree would kind of allow me to dabble in all of those things and decide what it is that I wanted to do. I wasn't quite ready to just focus on photography. And I think I was interested in, like I was saying before, meaning making. More than I was interested in aesthetics and the technical side of photography. So I ended up doing a Bachelor of Arts in Media Arts and Production at UTS, which was a 3-year degree. It was kind of all encompassing, but I did my sub major in film theory, and that was probably the best part of my degree, and in many ways has informed the way that I work now. And I would say has allowed me to kind of venture into creative directing, which I've always sort of done through photography, but now in particular, especially when I'm working with clients, I'm providing treatments and I'm giving justification for certain things. I'm referencing back to a lot of the stuff that I studied in film theory. You know, I discovered some of my favorite filmmakers like Pedro Almodovar, and we talked about total cinema, which is about how every single aspect of Almodovar's films is telling you something, from the set design to the costumes, to the color palette. Looked at Wong Kar-wai and really loved the cinematography and the kind of oversaturated colors in Wong Kar-wai's work, and also the editing style. We looked at Dogma, which is a movement in cinema. It was kind of about breaking all of the conventions of cinema and sort of the suspension of disbelief, because, you know, like, cinema traditionally was about going in to see a film and losing all sense of reality and kind of disappearing into this fantasy world. But Dogma was this movement that kind of tried to unpack all of that, and moved into, I would say, kind of documentary in a way, like pseudo documentary, which is something I've become really interested in as well. So my uni experience was opening up my mind and opening up my resources, to films and directors and concepts I don't think I ever would have touched on had I not gone to uni. So no, I didn't study photography. I did study an arts degree, and I did study film theory. What I do is multifaceted in a lot of ways, like I think most people. And I would say my end goal is to be a director. At the moment, I guess that medium in which I'm directing is stills, but eventually I want it to be film.
Yeah, I think that's also like the beauty of our generation as well, being able to, I mean, I think we're kind of coming out of this period where there's a pressure to have to define your career as just one thing, and now people are just able to explore different mediums and then kind of like discover along their journey different facets of their creative practice. Because I think in the same way that I don't feel like just being a DJ is enough for me. Like I'm still discovering what I want to do and learning new things. So I don't feel the need to be so attached to any like specific label. Like they're just for the convenience of other people more so than they are for me and how I would like see or define myself, because that's something that changes all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing flows into the other as well. Like, I think, I don't know who said it to me, it must have been at uni, but someone sort of said, like, the best filmmakers are people that aren't just looking at films for inspiration. They're looking at paintings, they're looking at ceramics, they're looking at architecture, and
Mm.
they're allowing all of those things to inform their film practice. And that's what makes a great anything. And I think being multidisciplinary is all just contributing to making you more of a total artist, I think.
Mm.
But in a lot of ways, like you were saying, it is kind of stigmatized, or at least I think our generation, we're called slashies, and the assumption is that we think we can do everything. We're jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. And I think we've all come across those stigmas, particularly I think with the added element of having a social media profile. Like for me, I I really hate being called an influencer, but at the same time, I can't be mad about it because I guess I, in a lot of ways, present myself as an influencer. And so I get really frustrated when I feel like, the onus is on me to prove that I'm smart, because it's this idea that if you're an influencer, you have a public platform of some sort, you're vapid and vague and vacuous, and, you don't deserve what you have, or you just
Mm.
get free things all the time. But I also understand that this industry, or I suppose kind of the back end of what I work in, is a little esoteric in a lot of ways and is a little shrouded in mystery.
Mm.
So I can't I can't be, kind of mad about the idea that people sort of think, oh, first and foremost, I think people would think I'm an influencer. Um, which I don't define myself like that, but I also can't help kind of the way that I present myself, or the way that people read me on an external level.
Mm. Yeah, I think also like social media and young people being able to like build their own platform or be kind of like in the eyes of the public also means that you feel like a pressure to define what you do at a young age.
Mm,
And the more, like, the older that I get, the more I realize that you don't have to know exactly what you want to do in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s. Like, a lot of the people that I look up to and admire, they have done all different things at different stages of their lives. Sometimes they planned them, sometimes they were unplanned. And I think that's the beauty of life and having a career and being able to do different things rather than say like when you're 21 you're a photographer and that's what you're going to be forever. Like the journey that you've had between starting Culture Machine and where you're at now isn't necessarily something that you could have planned for at the time, but
no way. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely couldn't have planned for. And I still can't plan for. I mean,
Yeah.
2020's shown us that for everybody, like we think we can sort of forecast or plan our lives to a certain extent, and then 2020 took all of that away from us and went,
Mm-hmm.
no, you're going to live week to week, day to
Yeah.
day, and we're not.
You're gonna not understand the concept of time. You're no longer gonna know what day it is, what time it is.
You're gonna have perpetual existential crises on a
Yeah.
daily, hourly basis.
Yes.
Um, but I think on that note, I've reflected on that a lot and thought that I think the only difference between our generation kind of evolving and being human, and starting out as something at 21 and being something else at 30, the
Mm.
only difference is that our generation lives that out publicly in a lot of ways and lives
Yeah.
that out online. Whereas prior to our generation and prior to social media and the internet, you weren't necessarily documenting every stage of the process in the way that we are now. So it's like
Mm.
everything's online now. You could Google what you and I were doing at whenever we started using the internet and go all the way back to find that. Whereas, anything prior to that, you can't really go back and look through someone's archives in the same way that you can now,
Mm.
which is why our public presence and the way that anything we do online is kind of terrifying, because as as you see with cancel culture, something that you did 20 years ago could
Mm.
come back now in a way that could never have kind of been documented before. So I often worry about the younger generation,
Mm.
understanding the responsibility or like the permanence of your online existence, because I don't think we quite realize it as we're doing it. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Instagram post here, Instagram post there, Twitter post here, Twitter post there. And, 20, 30 years later, you might not be the same person. And I feel like we don't have as much compassion for the evolution of a human being
Yeah, I agree.
now as we may have before.
That's definitely something that I've observed and like worry about. But I think I'm hoping that like moving forward, as people become more aware of how you are allowed to change between the ages of 15 and 25 and 35 and 45, and just I think a lot of the problems that we have come from like a lack of just education and awareness. Like if people aren't told that they're able to evolve and learn from their mistakes and how to handle like being called out or cancelled in a way that allows for like self growth rather than being adamant about a position that you took 5 years ago, 5 days
Mm.
ago, 5 hours ago, then hopefully we'll be able to make progress. But yeah, cancel
Yeah.
culture is scary.
It's terrifying. It's probably one of my biggest fears.
Yeah.
Like, and all of my friends know that. Everyone I work with knows that. I'm like almost to the point of being like actually paranoid about every single thing that I do, in like from captions to like symbolism to, you know, the way that something is styled in a shoot. A lot of the time things are out of my control, and particularly in like the commercial realm, that's when I start to become quite like observant and really trying to kind of go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, because at any point if that falls back on me as being a part of that team that didn't speak up, then of course I would feel really horrible about it. And I think also, people come for people that have a public profile, understandably, to give answers.
Yeah.
So if I was involved in a commercial situation like a photo shoot or a campaign, and it was sort of in any way offensive, I would feel a massive responsibility to have said something. And so I think that a lot of my day-to-day workings are just kind of really trying to cross-check things with people and make sure that we're not doing anything offensive. But I think I really did go through a phase where I struggled with that and just kind of took a massive break, because I felt like I was never going to be right and I was never going to be enough. I was always going to be hurting or offending or excluding someone.
Yeah.
And at some point I was going to be silencing myself. So I think the next stage of my journey now is less about being right and more about being honest. And that takes a lot of courage, because being honest doesn't always mean being right,
Yeah.
and being agreeable. And I think that a big part of my personality, even as a kid, was being agreeable, doing what everyone told me I should do, and doing what everyone told me was the right thing to do.
Yeah,
so I
and
think
trying to make other people happy as well.
Huge. I don't know if it's like a Sagittarius trait or if it's like kind of, the different ways we were raised and stuff. But I think for sure that's something I'm like workshopping at the moment, because it's like, how can you be an artist as well without being able to be honest and truthful to yourself? It's something, it's like an ongoing journey, and I think that it's something I'll probably come into more as I get older and as I come more into myself.
Yeah,
I think a lot of this is an exploration of identity, of the
definitely self-discovery.
Yeah.
I think like I always say that the onus on women, or the responsibility that women are given by like society in terms of being on a moral high ground and being held accountable to this almost like impossible moral standard, means that you're like confined to like society's expectations or limitations. So one of the most radical things that you can do as a woman is to step into yourself unapologetically, with courage, and also be willing to admit that you're wrong and willing to grow. I think that's more radical than like shrouding yourself or building like a prison in which you like are too fearful to actually like do anything, like taking even small steps out of that um like kind of the comfort zone that you create with this discomfort and this fear is something that is part of artistry, and also like just a radical thing for anyone to be doing. So because I
Mm.
think sometimes it seems like when you're just scrolling through the internet, everybody's making all these big declarations about how things should be, how things are wrong, and then you feel so hopeless because like actual changes that would need to happen in society or that people really need are not anything that can happen with just a tweet or just an Instagram
Mm.
post. Like
Yeah.
it takes a lot of like internal unlearning, a lot of structural change in society. Those things take time, but I think on a day-to-day basis, being able to, you know, just like move through the world with a little less fear and like a little more courage, a little more honesty is how society is able to progress like collectively, rather than feeling like these people are ahead, those people are behind, and they stay behind. Like, how can you close those
Mm.
gaps? Like, that's something that
Well,
I'm interested in.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think, in particular, like this year, a lot of social justice causes and social justice warriors online. It's this whole idea that, you know, if you're contributing to a social justice cause in an echo chamber where everybody agrees with you, are you really doing anything? Are you
Mm,
really changing anything? Like, doing something outside of that context that makes you feel uncomfortable is where change happens, you know? And it's just like, talking about the same thing on Instagram, for example, that everybody's talking about with the popular opinion that everybody holds, you know, does that actually cause change? Maybe,
mm,
maybe on
mm,
a small level, or are we actually already in a community that, like I said, that's an echo chamber, that all of those people already agree with that? It's
mm,
outside of that community that we need to start talking to people that don't have that same knowledge and don't think the same way. I really think that for me, there's sort of the idea that I've adopted, or the behavior that I've adopted, is that like that actions obviously are more powerful than words, I think.
yeah.
And if I can embody all of the things that I believe are right and somehow contribute that to the community and do that actively through opportunities I give people, the people I choose to work with, you know, really changing things in terms of like, you know, on-set crews, really thinking about the people involved with making something and the voices involved with that. That to me, at least in my ability to contribute or give back, is far more powerful than me putting up a post or a hashtag. For me, anyway.
I think everyone has like different roles as well. That's something that
Yeah,
I was able to realize. Like, you don't, it's not like your personal responsibility to change everything. You know, I think sometimes when you do feel, um, you know, like empathetic, or you do understand the struggles that people are going through, or you do want to be able to help, you can feel like overwhelmed with where to
mm,
begin. And yeah, also when it comes to like social media as well, like you don't know someone just through what they
mm,
post, and it is easy to assume that you do, but everyone's only sharing like a part of their life, whether that is true to themselves or not. It's like you just can't hold so much weight on to those things. How people are able to like action change, some people are really well spoken online, can write or make really eye-catching designs that are able to summarize really complex
totally.
issues. So that's a role that they would play. And for you, because you have a studio now, you're able to hire people and be more conscious about the decisions that you make in business. That's something that you're
Yeah.
able to focus on too. So I think being able to acknowledge that and own it is
Yes.
important. And then just creating separation between like, you're aware that people are going to make assumptions about you, but you know what you're doing, and that's something that you're practicing. So that's what's most
That's a
important.
really good way of summarizing it, actually. And I think a really good way of looking at, like you were saying, everyone's got a different skill set. Everyone's got a different kind of thing that they can offer in all aspects. It's like I work in teams all of the time because I love
Mm.
teams and I
Mm-hmm.
love the collective effort that a group of people can contribute. And in those teams, every person plays a role. Everyone's got strengths and everyone's got weaknesses. And it doesn't mean any one person is lesser than the another. So if you apply that to social justice causes and kind of the greater society, you're very right in saying like some people have like pragmatic and practical skills to offer. Some people are, like you said, they're able to condense complex information into graphics that the average person can quickly consume and spread information really quickly. Some people are kind of actively doing that within their communities, and then the people, like you say, they choose to hire and work with. So yeah, you can't just blanket judge someone and their contribution to a particular cause, or their how much they've said about something, because not everyone has strengths in saying or expressing how they feel in a condensed, concise way to the public and be able to press publish without getting intense anxiety afterwards about how they're going to be read or misread or how they're going to be judged. So yeah, I think it's a really good way of looking at things and just saying every person can play a part in this and they can do it in their own way.
Yeah.
And you have no idea who a person is outside of that offline world and that one kind of dimensional idea that you have of them. Policy,
Yeah, like everyone's living in their own version of reality as well. And whenever you're looking at something, you're bringing your own experience and interpreting it through that. So everyone's going to have a different interpretation. I think like where the dissonance really exists is when somebody is like projecting an image that is very contrary to the way that they actually move through the world, and that's where like calling out is necessary. But I think most of the time it's kind of just like, I don't know, everybody is just throwing their insecurities out there and trying to get some sort of feedback from it. So I think for me, I've definitely, like you said, like you obviously been as well, like reflecting on it and like processing and thinking about how you can find a balance, a workable balance that allows you to create the way that you want to create. Also, be able to make money through the work that you're doing, and somehow within that also have a message as well, or to be able to represent something beyond just aesthetics, I think.
Absolutely, that you summarized that really well in a nutshell. Very much so. And I mean, without cross-referencing another pod, but like I'm a massive fan of Flex Mami, and I'm a massive fan of Bobo and Flex, and everything that they unpack on their show. And one of the topics that they talked about the other week was trying to introduce this law where celebrities are held accountable and for photoshopped images. And they sort of unpacked that and this idea that we look to celebrities or public figures to be completely honest with us at all times, but at what point do we sort of draw the line? So they were sort of saying, we can ask the Kardashians to say this has been photoshopped or this has been retouched or whatever. Do we then ask every single person to do that, even if you've got 200 followers? Because the extent that you can influence your peers is maybe just as much as, if not more, than a celebrity. So I don't know. I mean, it's that's maybe taking us a little bit off tangent. It's a bit of a convoluted idea, but I think outside of social media, outside of all of this stuff, how do you really know who you are at all times? I think it's a big thing to ask someone, who are you? Like in general, most people, you say like, introduce yourself. It's no surprise that most people start off with their name, their age, and what they do, because we don't know how to define ourselves really beyond that. And how often are we asked to think about like, no, who are you at the core? Tell me about your soul. Tell me about your deepest fears and desires.
Crack open your trauma chest now.
Like we are all, defining ourselves on a superficial level because that's all we know how to process. And we're operating in a world that's asking us to present ourselves on face value. So I think the bigger conversation for me is less about kind of like #authentic online and how authentic I am on my Instagram, and more about like, it's a massive thing to ask any one person to be authentic in every part of their lives, because we're constantly in flux and we're constantly adapting to this world around us that's constantly changing. And then also on top of that, adding on lots of personal experiences that ebb and flow. So I think, our understanding of people and our peers needs to just be a lot more open to consideration,
Mm.
like,
Yeah, like in
yeah.
regards to that Bobo and Flex episode, which I've also listened to because I stan as well. I think when it comes to this, like celebrities having to disclose whether their pictures are photoshopped or not, it's just like typical band-aid effect that
Yes,
people try to do. Like the issue isn't whether people are photoshopping their pictures or not, it's why are they doing it to begin with and what
exactly.
is the reason for that. And a lot of it
Hmm.
comes from like unrealistic beauty standards that are projected onto celebrities. Like I think if celebrities didn't have to get work done and go under the knife, they probably wouldn't because it's expensive and like maintenance is expensive too. But in order for them to exist in that world and for them to maybe do what they want to do, they need to do that. They feel like they have to in order to keep up, in order to keep up appearances. And then that is then projected onto the rest of society. And that's how people or how companies can sell shit. Like, that's it.
Yeah. And that's
That's not going
honestly
to
the
stop
biggest,
unrealistic beauty
well,
standards.
that's it. And this is the biggest kind of smack in the face for me, I think, this year. Just out of all the rhetoric I've engaged in, there's been a lot of stuff unpacking, lots of things, all coming down to the fact that we operate in a capitalist society
Mm.
globally.
Mm-hmm.
We operate in a capitalist world, and the root of many of these problems comes from capitalism and the an inequality in wealth,
Yeah.
and also just the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and we're just trying to sell each other shit.
Yeah.
And it sucks because you're also like super aware of it and super uncomfortable with it, but also a part of the system.
Yeah.
And just like I'm saying earlier, like, yeah, I'm doing commercial work. I don't hate what I'm doing. I'm not, embarrassed by what I do because I'm always trying to do my best at what I do. In some way, I'm trying to make some sort of change. But at the end of the day, I also know that I'm feeding this capitalist machine that's trying to sell us shit.
Yeah. Like for our generation, we kind of like we were, and we're growing up in like a more developed society. So we are kind of like thrown into the system and you're working through it and then you become aware of it and you feel like you have a choice or you have the space to make these sorts of moral considerations that maybe the previous generations weren't able to because they're coming from like poverty or they're coming from like
Hmm.
survive, like you basically work to live, not live to work. Our generation is more about like being able to find pleasure in the work that we do, but whether that is like realistic or not, I think like for me, I recognize that no matter what type of work that I'm doing, there's going to be good parts and there's going to be bad parts. I just have to find
Yeah,
the thing that I'm willing to, go through those uncomfortable experiences in order to like progress further
for
forward.
sure.
And when it comes to like commercial work, I can see like the criticism of it and like the hyper um like commercialization that's happening with creative work. But at the same time, like when I look back on my short career thus far, I can put pieces together and think like if I didn't do that commercial job, I wouldn't have been exposed to this other person who I'm able to work with like in a creatively free way and do something that maybe I'm not going to make money from, but create something that is going to be able to have like a more authentic message. And I think when people get too critical about like this one job that this one person did or like these like tiny little things, you lose sight of a bigger picture and like your career is
Yeah.
always going to be a journey. There's always going to be mistakes. And I think if you're not looking back on work that you've done and thinking like, oh, I could have done so much better than that, then you're not really growing. And for anyone to say like, oh well, like 3 years ago you did this one job and like are you going to speak on the company that you
Hmm.
worked, and it's like we've moved
Yeah.
on,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. No, exactly. And it's like, so for example, I think that's a really good point to make where you're like, if I hadn't have done this and I wouldn't have gotten leverage to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I've always kind of realized that in order to make change, you've got to kind of know the system to break the system in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yeah.
And in order to get to a position of power where you can actually make decisions, to some extent, you have to kind of work your way up.
Yeah, you need
And
resources and you need to gather
you
them
need
over time.
resources. Exactly. And you need somewhat of a backing behind you where people actually listen to you and they want to give your kind of word authority. So it's
Yeah,
like
and that
when I go
comes
into
with experience
situations,
as well. It's not, I think
yeah,
we like people can be too entitled in terms of how much access they're given at like very early
mm,
points on in their career, and that just comes with also being really enthusiastic and passionate. Like when you're younger, being like, why
mm,
can't I just do this kind of work or do that kind of work? And then when you're actually doing it, you're like, oh shit, like
yeah,
if I didn't
for sure.
get all this experience, I wouldn't be able to handle like a bigger job. So that's kind of
But
like,
also, yeah, but also realizing as you get older and become more confident that you can say something. You can speak up when you're uncomfortable.
mm,
Like you can speak up when something doesn't feel right. Like I would say that I do that often in the work that I do now. Like when it comes
mm-hmm,
to casting or when it comes to styling or when it comes to a particular message, I'm constantly reading things and being like, "Hey, I don't know how I feel about this," or "Can we make sure that we're casting this?" And
yeah,
that to me feels a little bit insensitive. Like I can say all these things now
mm-hmm,
because I feel like I'm in a position where I'm given some sort of kind of respect in a way.
yeah,
When I was first starting out, I was just a photographer that was like, do your job.
yeah.
Like, give us the photos, do your job. Like,
Yeah.
no one's
Press the
asking
shutter
you
and
where,
then get out of here.
yeah, no one's asking you if you think that hairstyle's offensive or if you think that the way that the stylist dressed her in this outfit is like no one's asking you those questions, nor is
Mm,
anyone listening to you if you vocalize them.
mm, mm.
So now I feel like I am very much saying those
Yeah.
things and oftentimes clients are listening to me. So yeah, as you say, it's a bargaining sort of thing where you're like getting to a point in your career where you have the leverage and the power to actually.
Yeah. And that goes back to like the echo chamber thing as well, because when you're online and you've curated what you're following, it's easy to assume that everybody sees the world the way that you and the people that you follow do. But when you actually get into the real world and you're working with clients that are a generation older, they're coming from completely different backgrounds, different experience, like you need to learn how to communicate in a way that you can find a middle ground with them. Like if I'm working with
Yeah.
a client that doesn't really understand like the way that feminism has influenced me or the things that I've consumed and lived through that inform my experience and my perspective, I need to learn how to communicate that with them so that we can find like a solution. And because not everybody is going to get it, and a lot of people don't get it, and it's also like hard to say that they have to get it too, because we're not
Mm,
living in like a politically neutral society or in
no.
a society that is enlightened. Like everything's fucked up and everybody has a different journey.
Absolutely. I think that's another really good point. Like we in the creative sphere, we operate as mediators, as mediators between sort of the community that we belong to and the clients that we work with, and constantly kind of vacillating between, like, first of all, are you exploiting me or using me as a token?
Mm,
And then secondly, how do I best represent my community or whoever it is that I think that I need to be doing this for
mm,
in a commercial environment where I'm being told to be authentic, but within the constraints of make sure you show me the logo, make sure you
mm,
show us the logo. Like every
mm.
shot, there's got to be a
Product
logo,
shot.
and you're like, but they're like, but we just want you like being you, but
Mm,
with the logo in every shot, face front to the like, you know what I
mm,
mean? So it's this sort of you've got to take your wins with where they are, if that makes it. You've got to take your wins with your losses in a lot of ways. And you've
mm,
also got to be a very good communicator, because one thing that I find really frustrating is like nobody is a mind reader. Clients are not mind readers. In fact, they're really not thinking about much more than KPIs. They're
yeah.
thinking about selling products,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they've come to you because you're cool and young and hip and all of the things that they think they need to market to the biggest consumer market, that is the youth. Like
Mm.
that's
18
really
to
what they're here
25 year
for,
olds.
right? And that's the bulk of my work, is clients coming to me as a mediator or a sort of like a linking point between them and the youth that they wish so much to appeal to.
Mm,
And that youth is highly critical of being sold things and highly critical of whether or not something is authentic or whether or not something is cool. And it's like you can't sell to them unless you understand them and you speak their language.
mm,
So it's this idea that you've got to be very good at communicating between the two. And I've definitely been in situations on set where I'm with a client that is much older than me and doesn't get it. doesn't understand, why a certain thing is a certain way. And I've got to go right back to the beginning and unpack it for them and be like, hey, so there's this thing where we need to be considerate of this because of this reason. And they'll be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Oh,
it's
we
in
didn't
your best
understand.
interests to care. So
Exactly.
listen.
If you would like to not be trolled when this goes up on Instagram, I suggest that you listen to me now.
Yeah.
Like, I suggest that we find a solution to this and not do that and delete
Yeah.
those photos. When I first started the agency side of Culture Machine, I remember getting the first message from someone saying, why don't you have enough people of color? You're a person of color. Why don't you represent people of color? And, at that time, I don't know that I was necessarily thinking about it when I
You're
first
just working
started
in
out.
the environment
I
that
was
you
working within the constraints of an industry that I was very new at, and within the constraints of wanting to get people work. And it was just kind of like, at that time, there was a particular person that they were looking for and a particular face that they were looking for. And as I've evolved and, like I've said, come to terms with the sort of power that I have through what I do, but the other thing is, like, I don't know that I've necessarily overtly gone out to be like, I'm going to sign this, this, and this. Like, I've said very honestly with people, like, the people that I've signed to the modeling side of the agency are people that I've organically met. Like, I have a story about how I met every single one of those people, and it was either at a music festival, or it was a graphic design workshop, or it was through a friend of a friend, or it was, it's not like I went on Instagram and went looking for person of color to sign. That wasn't what I was doing at all. It was just like, who is surrounding me at the moment? Who is a part of my community? What are the faces that I see every day? And that's a representation. And I think now Culture Machine, the faces of Culture Machine are the faces that I see every day and the faces of people that I surround myself with. So it's no surprise then that you'll probably start seeing, or have seen, that a lot of the models that I represent are also talent. They're also making videos. They're doing collage art. They're taking photos. They're, directing sometimes. That, like, that it's just because I'm surrounding myself with those people, and I kind of came into this journey of wanting to be around more people like me. Like, I definitely think in the beginnings of Culture Machine, I was living in Bondi and I was very much in that bubble. And I think, maybe subconsciously weighing in on the fact that I was kind of leaning towards my whiteness. I never really considered that, honestly, until this year. I never really unpacked my proximity to whiteness until
let's
this
get
year.
into that now.
And yeah. Well, I mean, like, growing up, I grew up in Bali, and being mixed race, or a halfie, it was considered beautiful, desirable, and, I definitely, growing up, was excited by the idea that I was exotic, being called exotic, having people ask, what's your mix? Where are you from? Where are your parents from? For me, I always found compliments. And because I think in a lot of ways I was really proud of my heritage. So it didn't really cross my mind that, people were fetishizing or exoticizing me, or that there was, some sort of inherent racism implied within the sort of celebration of me being mixed race. And so I think also, particularly when it came to, like, beauty standards, when I was living in Bali, I felt beautiful and I was told I was beautiful. And then when I moved to Australia, that never happened. Also feel like there was some sort of inherent racism, I guess, in myself, and I suppose what I was seeking out in beauty too. So my journey with proximity to whiteness is something that is very much sort of a new concept for me to be grappling with, because I guess in high school I didn't see that I had any sort of advantage in my being mixed race, because nobody was considering my whiteness in high school. I wasn't seeing my proximity to whiteness, and I wasn't considering it any sort of a privilege at that point in time, because I wasn't
but you weren't necessarily given, like, the opportunity to really do that either. Like, I think what's important is that you're becoming aware of these things, and you're processing and unpacking and learning and growing with it, rather than continuing that way. Like, I think that's what's empowering and important.
Yeah, well, I guess the sort of the what then flipped was when I went to uni, and then when I started working in the industry, and I would say maybe like a few years ago when, you know, for the first time I heard the term POC. And I had mixed race people and, well, POC people coming to me and saying, you know, I look up to you as a POC feminist online, and like the work that you do, and just the fact that you are who you are in the position that you're in, being a POC feminist. And this kind of, again, this topic of embodiment and sort of, you know, being that person in that position and looking the way that you do, it has so much power in it in itself.
Yeah.
So that, I was like very taken aback and obviously grateful and proud to hear those things, but I was also a little confused because I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I'm
you
POC.
weren't like yet aware of the influence
I
that you were
wasn't
having.
really, no, and I guess maybe because I spent a lot of my youth trying to assimilate in a way and sort of, you know, develop my proximity to whiteness, or at least utilize the things in front of me that came from my proximity to whiteness. I wasn't necessarily considering it. And then I was being told in my older life that I was, you know, a POC person who was like, they were looking up to. That's amazing. But then most recently, I think I was sort of holding myself accountable for, I remember listening to a podcast where, you know, the discussion was about the convenience of identifying as POC when it works for you and when it doesn't. And I just thought, shit, have I ever been doing that? You know, like there's certain spheres where, you know, my white education, my white upbringing did great things for me. And then there were certain situations where being a person of color and having an Indonesian dad and growing up mixed race and having, you know, parents that migrated here was working in my favor. So it's this whole kind of vacillating between these two worlds and not really belonging to one particular world, but then understanding the power and privilege that comes with both sides. You know, like when I go back to Bali, I've got the power and privilege of being mixed race in the sense that of, you know, I have a white mom or whatever, or I come from some privilege. And then when I'm here, the benefit is that I'm not completely white and I kind of, you know, maybe fill a criteria that they're looking for that is a mixed race person that feels safer to a client than someone that's not mixed race. So, you know, is that a privilege that I'm, you know, taking and profiting off of? Is it? So it's just this internal struggle for me where I'm like, at what point,
well, how do you balance? Yeah.
How do I balance that?
Yeah, I think like anybody can adhere to certain beauty standards or present themselves in a way that's going to be like visually appealing, but ultimately, like if you're put in that position, what are you going to say? What do you have to say for yourself, or what do you represent to the people that then see you or like are represented? When I'm in that position, I would hope that whatever I represent or what I have to say, when they go like one step deeper, that it's going to be something that resonates with them or it's going to be interesting. So I think that's kind of like the important part of being able to process your experience with your proximity to whiteness. And then, of course, now as you're becoming more aware of it, you're putting that into practice in your work in a way that you might not have before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like I was saying earlier, you know, surrounding myself with people that like me and surrounding myself with the people I want to see get these jobs, and the people that maybe didn't have as much access or were blocked out of the industry. You know, like my dad worked 3 jobs as a laborer to get me through school here in Australia, and, you know, experienced racism on a daily basis, and, you know, didn't speak English very well, and that blocked him out of many of the opportunities that I've been given purely because I have a Western education and I have a degree, and that I have a resume and all of these things. So I guess underlying a lot of the work that I do now is giving opportunities to people that I see talent in, but I also, and again, it's not like a handout. It's not a token thing. It's like I'm surrounding myself with people I like, which also happen to be people of color. Yeah. And I'm also creating opportunities for them wherever I can with the work that I get.
You see potential in them as well. You see.
Yeah. I think a lot of us trying our best and constantly learning. And I think I'm just kind of like under the sort of, my motivation is just to learn as much as I can and expose myself to as many opinions and as many experiences as possible, because that's the only way you can really kind of inform the decisions that you make,
Yeah.
which comes back to, you know, me wanting to surround myself with people in the crews and the sets that I'm on that can inform me. Because I think a lot of the time these big mistakes are made when that consideration isn't made to those voices. Like, for
Mm.
example, there was sort of, I don't know if I should make specific examples, but say, you know, a film was made and it was, you know, considered to have been racist and done the wrong thing. And the filmmaker didn't intend for that, but it was read in that way. But then if you look at the crew involved with that film, there were no people of color in that film. And so that's obviously creating an environment where mistakes can easily be made. Whether that person intended for that thing to be offensive or for that community to be targeted is one thing, but the fact that they didn't consider asking those people before in any way representing them, that's where the problem lies, I
Yeah.
think. So, like, this kind of full circle conversation now, but like, I guess my whole thing in the position that I'm in is, yes, I have, you know, achieved a certain level of power and that's come through privilege to an extent, but it's also come from a lot of hard work, and it's come
Mm-hmm.
from, you know, using the tools that I have, like my education, to further myself. The best that I can do is keep learning and keep stimulating my mind and keep trying to empathize by being around people, being
Mm-hmm.
around a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to our talk about tokenism, I don't think that that is tokenistic, or that there's anything wrong in trying to search for things outside of, you know, sort of what's immediately around you. But overall, you know, what we're asking for takes certain steps and a certain level of discomfort before we can get to this utopian kind of world that we
Yeah, I
wish for.
think
Yeah.
like in terms of representation, it is twofold, because yes, you can make the argument that it is tokenistic or exploitative. There are plenty of cases where that is the case, but at the same time, yeah, it sucks that you just have to like appreciate any step forward as like a good step and hope that there will be further steps. I think that's the thing. Like sometimes people become very reductive in the way that they think, like that's it, like that's the only thing that's going to exist. It's like you have to think that this is an opportunity to allow for more people like that to get those
Exactly.
opportunities, so that they can then, the younger generation is looking at that and thinking I could do that, or if they can do that then I can do something else. Like that's kind of where
Exactly.
I sit. Like it's not as
Exactly.
easy as just one company
No.
that's run by only white people to just suddenly change the way that they hire completely. I wish it
Exactly.
was that easy, but it's not. But it takes also those little kids of color to think like,
Yes,
look, these models
exactly.
working in fashion, I really work in fashion, maybe not as a model, but I'm going to study this thing instead, and then hopefully
Yeah.
I'll be able to work my way up and the
Well,
system will change.
exactly.
And
Like
yeah.
you know, within the film industry, for example, like when I first started, my main kind of thing that was in front of me was just that I'm a woman trying to work in a man's world. Like that
Yeah.
was the primary thing that I was dealing with at uni, you know, being told cinematography, it's a man's world, you got to hold heavy gear, you got to do this, you got to do that. Like this is for a man. There's hardly
Mm,
any women cinematographers, let alone female directors, let alone female
mm,
anything.
mm.
Most of the roles women in film were producers, because it was, you know, a palatable kind of role for a woman to make, to take, you know, and navigating this thing of, you know, a woman can have a certain amount of decision making power, but surely not, you know, the top tier of decision
Yeah,
making
she needs to
power.
be told by a man what she needs to be putting together and not to come up with the
Right.
idea herself.
Exactly. So I think, you know, primarily I was like, I want to see more women in the industry. I want to see more
Mm,
female photographers. I want to see more female directors. And so I guess, like, if I was to kind of have any agenda coming into this industry right from the beginning, it was a feminist agenda. It was, I want to see more women in this industry. And I
mm.
know that that's going to catapult change. Now in 2020, I'm thinking more about cultural diversity, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about more diversity, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, obviously. And, you know, the complex thing about that is in order to see that diversity, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, it starts with a certain level of tokenism, because it's like that, there maybe aren't many BIPOC female cinematographers in the industry. Why is that? Because they didn't have the same access. So does that mean we overtly go out and look for that person, or look for someone that could fulfill that role and train them up? Yeah. Are you going to call that tokenistic? Maybe. But that gives that one BIPOC woman of color an opportunity that didn't have it before. Do you know what I mean? So it's just
Yeah,
this
I think
kind of like,
anyone that's thinking that somebody being able to have the opportunity to be trained up in a job that they previously would not be considered for as being tokenistic is just, they're just jealous.
well, yeah, I guess it's just this thing of like, oh, it's so tokenistic to ask for, we're looking for this person, looking for a BIPOC woman of color. Well, I guess that's convoluted. By BIPOC, do you overtly go out and look at that? And by overtly going out to look for that, are you inherently racist or tokenistic in doing that? It's just like extremely kind of convoluted. But at the same time, the very realist sort of perspective that I have is, unless we're doing those things, we're not giving entry to those people.
Yeah, if your
So,
intentions are good and that person is being treated fairly and getting something out of it and then able to progress themselves, that is a good step. And then everything from there is going to be just determined over time. Like, it's not as simple as, you can't have an idea of how something's going to turn out like in the present. You have to leave room for possibilities that you can't plan for.
Exactly. And realize that there's a bigger goal at the end of all of this. And, you've got to take sort of these smaller steps to get there. But, I would say overall, and maybe again, it's the kind of bubble that I'm in, overall, I, sort of pinch myself a lot of the time at how grateful I am for the kind of way that the industry is changing and the way in which I'm allowed to, or I decided to operate in it, and the people I get to work with, and how many changes I've seen, and how much more considerate and respectful people are in a lot of ways. And again, I can't speak for the whole industry because I know there's still a lot of fucked up shit that happens. But
at least in where you're working, that's what's important, because that's where you have influence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, being a good human and just being considerate. And if you don't know something, ask. And if asking is offensive or rude, then go and figure it out yourself.
Yeah, do a little Google.
Go and research it. Exactly.
Yeah, I think like even for me, because I left Australia in 2017, which was like 3 years ago, at that time I didn't feel like represented. I didn't feel like there was that much like POC representation, especially for women. I kind of thought like if I really wanted to do something in Australia, I would have to suppress like the outspoken parts of myself or the parts of me that are connected to my identity in order to like move forward. I would have to like assimilate in order. So that's why I was like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to leave and hope that everyone can the hope that it'll progress like on its own. And being back this year, I've seen it's so different, like from the advertisements that I see, from even just something like when Neighbours comes on TV, and I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot of people of color in Neighbours. I swear, like 3 years ago, it was all white cast, and now there's actually like diversity in Australian soap TV. So like, I think in 3 years, it's been cool to see like such a huge. I mean, for me, it's considered huge, considering when I was growing up, there was no people of color in anything. So
no, actually,
that means
I remember
work is being done, and you're a part of that movement too, which is really amazing.
Yeah, no, I have to say I have the similar experience, in terms of seeing, because it's like, you don't know something exists until you see it. And the more we see it, the more we normalize it as well. Normalize is a weird word, but the more sort of we eradicate this fear of that thing, because we're seeing more of it. Like, I'm really proud of the work that I get to do. Like, I've photographed, girls in their hijabs the other day for Populissima, and I was so excited to do that. And our stylist had the brief to, dress them conservatively, and she did all the research that she could, looking into what she could pull for clothing and what was appropriate and what wasn't, and giving those girls an opportunity to proudly wear their hijabs and proudly advertise for a brand that is accepted by so many people and bought by so many people, you know, in a diverse community. That was really exciting for me because when I first started in the industry, there was a certain type of model. What's exciting about influencer culture, or at least what social media has done, is it's given people a platform to be who they are, and for other people who normally wouldn't see that outside of their little echo chamber to start seeing that.
Mm.
And, you know, start wanting to explore that and start being like, oh, you know, I want to follow this person because I'm really interested in this person's life, and I'm going to follow this person. And then you start seeing information on that person's page about certain things, like, for example, their hair, or like, you know, the girls with their hijabs kind of showing you different ways to style their hijab. Like, I never would have seen stuff like that before without access to the internet. And, you know, I think that the digital age and the access that we've been given to the online world obviously has its positives and negatives. But I suppose the access that I have to other people through my online presence, and particularly through my work in photography, is allowing, kind of being involved in those kinds of things and being able to photograph and give people opportunities that I never saw in anything, like you were saying, when we were growing up in Australia, like stuff, or like there wasn't anyone other than just like the pretty blonde, blue-eyed girls. And again, like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it was the dominant thing when I was at school, and I didn't see anything outside of that. And again, like, everything we're talking about is just the importance of representation and visibility.
There's no and having more than one thing exist at a time, rather than just one. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. What a lovely chat.
We'll speak soon.